Had to use OBS because for some reason Windows Camera wasn't seeing my camera, but not like anybody cares about that. I brought notes this time, so shit's getting serious. So obviously, this whole me doing this in videos is me trying to experiment, trying to understand things, and I'm trying to do it verbally for later reference, and I'm rewatching it later. And yeah, so anyway, so I made myself some notes, and I want to talk about a couple things. So let me see. First off, fighting a dragon. Wow, that's a long story. How do I make that short? Something I've been trying to do as a discipline, as like a skill that I've been explicitly trying to figure out the ins and outs of cultivating. Similar to, I imagine how when people were first trying to figure out how to carve shapes out of wood. Whatever, that sounds weird. Anyway, part of what I've been trying to do is figure out how to, or part of what I spent a lot of my life trying to figure out is how to surf my subconscious. The link between subconscious and frontal cortex is, I don't understand all the ins and outs, but to some degree, subconscious has primacy, right? So it manifests things to you in your brain. But the way your cortex interacts with it, when you're using your cortex to try to drive, there's this limitation. It's like a lens, like a gel color that you put in front of a theater light, right? Like it makes you start filtering down a lot of the data because your eyes, your ears, all your senses are aggregating more data than you can properly leverage and reference inside of your frontal cortex. So it tries to simplify. It's a multifaceted process where it's simplifying a lot of the data to more understandable chunks, but it's also explicitly limiting the important reference parameters. So if you think of querying an SQL table, rather than saying, show me everything that's about this particular person that exists inside of this table, it's just show me these 3 results about this person from all the various data tables about this person. So when your frontal cortex is interacting with the subconscious, it kind of does something like that. Don't know the science for it 100%, but I have enough of a grasp of it that I understand that's pretty accurate. It's close enough. So one of the things I tried to do through a lot of my life was figure out how to surf that, which is to say, rather than getting my cortex to try to reference and massage and limit data, so rather than it hitting that theater gel and causing the light to turn red, one of the things I've tried to learn how to do is sort of remove the gel after a fashion, figure out how to surf my subconscious so I'm limiting as little of the data as is possible. So I can get, a good way to think of this is people that think in words versus people that think in images. I've been trying to think more in images, and I was trying to as sort of like on accident at first, and by design later once I realized what I was doing and what I was trying to do. And I was like, well, what are you trying to accomplish with this? I think I sort of figured it out, was that I was trying to figure out how to see more data, how to make more of the infinite meaning relevant so I saw more relevant data points. So less limited data, more broad version of data, because it felt to me like some of the problems and things I was trying to understand required a capability to grasp larger amounts or more of the relevant data points, because there were ways that my conscious interpretation was coloring my subconscious data feed in a way that was causing me to miss relevant points. And I couldn't tell what the relevant points were, but I could tell there were components missing that were relevant. So sort of like it was a structure, right? Like if it was like a structure that was like a foundation and 4 pillars and a roof on top of that, like the way my consciousness was processing information from my subconscious, I could tell it was like I didn't have enough pillars. So if the top started to move around a little bit, it didn't have all 4 pillars to keep it in place. So I knew something was missing in my analysis. I guess that's a better way to put it. So one of the things I spent a lot of time as a discipline trying to figure out how to do was how to let my subconscious provide me more information and context and do less immediate constraints. So what's a good way to explain this in terms of how you see people operating? So when you're listening to someone talk, there's this phenomena that occurs where you hear a thing they say and you latch onto it because you want to figure a thing you want to say in response. And you start thinking about what you want to say in response, and you want to make sure you don't miss it. You don't want to lose the thread. You don't want to let it go, and you want to go back to that because you want to figure out the good place for you to interject and say the thing that you thought. Now, the issue with this phenomena is that once that starts to happen, like once you register the thing that you want to say, you start missing all the things that the person was saying. So it's like almost this blinding agent. You're hearing them, you're hearing everything they're saying up until this point that you have a thought about something you want to say, and it's like in a very real way you stop hearing them to some degree. So part of what I was trying to do with this exercise was figure out how to do that less in terms of how my consciousness was trying to use the subconscious data. So I was trying to figure out how to ride that. Similar to like a somewhat similar to like what happens on like a hallucinogen trip or like, you know, LSD or mushrooms. You start seeing more things and like you can't shut it off with your cortex kind of. So like you're having all this weird synesthesia and you're seeing like, you know, not like crazy hallucinations or anything like that, but like you're seeing more data points and you're able to restrict less data is a good way to think of it. So I started trying to figure out how to do that voluntarily as like I don't want to say trance or meditation, but kind of as trance or meditation. So did a lot of work on that, trying to figure out. I got pretty decent at it to where I'm able to see things in grand scope before I can understand what are the points that I'm trying to reference, but it allows me to make more complete points once I'm doing it because I know all the linking and mitigating factors, or at least I know more of them. I think I've beat this horse into the ground. That's not the phrase. You know what I mean, though. So something that I started deciding I was going to try to do recently as an experiment was convert this subconscious data stream into a voice, something that I could communicate with, something that I could ask direct questions and it could give me direct answers. But it was almost like I was trying to figure out how to hack the conscious interpretation layer. It's like I was trying to take the parts of your consciousness that build and structure language to an extent, and I was trying to sort of hand the reins of that fully over to my subconscious, but in a way that like my subconscious was able to talk in words and my consciousness was able to speak in words back. And sort of my running theory here was, and this is one of the things, you know, I sort of figured out when I was younger, language is slow and clumsy. I mean, a good way to think of language is if you think of the U.S. government, you're like, oh, the government's corrupt. And it's like, yes, it is, but it's better than no government. Language is kind of like that. Language is slow and it's clunky and it's lossy and it's causes all sorts of issues with communication because people use the same words and don't mean the same things, but it's better than no language. So sort of my theory here of what I wanted to try to experiment with was, okay, let's try to see if I can give my subconscious a way, if I can try to say, hey, I want you to talk to me, like talk, you know, like crazy person talking in your head to like yourself. And part of what sort of gave me the impetus of thinking about this when I was thinking and talking the other day about, you know, shamans talking to trees, because part of what a thought I had about that is that it's not so much shamans are talking to trees, it's shamans are talking to the part of themselves that is the tree and the part of the tree that is themselves, and back and forth and back and forth. So it's like this universal connectivity, right? Like this understanding of like we're all in the same matter, we all follow the same rules. So there's some like frequency that we sort of ride between all together. So theory was, let's see if I can get my subconscious to actually use words rather than these large flashes of images that had all this context and everything that I was having to parse and pare down just to see, right? Like just to experiment with it. Like what happens when I try to do that? It was fascinating. It was super fascinating. So it started with having to go through this sort of exercise of figuring out trying to identify whether or not I felt it was my subconscious using language or whether or not my consciousness was trying to superimpose language on top of it, which is to say, are the words that I'm hearing my subconscious converting to language instead of images? Or am I thinking of a question and the way that my conscious mind plugs into my subconscious, am I forcing an answer, right? So am I making an answer manifest, or is an answer just manifesting in the same way that an answer or an idea manifests from your subconscious? So first part of the exercise, once I was trying to do this, was identifying, okay, which do I think is which? Because I had a pretty good idea. Both were going to... I didn't know for sure my subconscious was going to be able to talk to me in words, but I knew for a damn fact I was going to try to superimpose words and pretend it was my subconscious. I knew that was going to happen. So I was like, okay, let's see if we can figure this out and start to identify it. So one of the highlights of going through this, and I was doing this in a thunderstorm in my bare feet when it was like, I don't know, probably 60 degrees outside, something like that. And it was like midnight or 1 a.m. And I was just sitting there like watching the thunder, listening to the rain. And I was trying to get my subconscious to talk to me in words. And through this process of going through a couple of times where I realized I was superimposing words and trying to say, oh no, this is what your subconscious is saying, Robert, but like my consciousness was manifesting it, like I could tell. There were some points where I wasn't sure, and I was like, there were some points where words came to my mind that I was like, I did not make that happen. And like I could tell once I started trying to differentiate between the two. There was one that I could tell I was forcing it and I was making words happen. And there was the other one that I could tell the words were manifesting and I had no idea what they were. I had no impetus, design, and control over what was happening. And one of the most sort of like interesting, fascinating parts of it that I thought was, it struck me for some reason. And what happened was I asked a question and I forced an answer and I could tell. And I sort of asked my subconscious, like, no, that's not you. What do you sound like? Because I was trying to figure out what the marker was, right? Like I could feel the difference, but I was trying to establish like the measurement, the thing that I could put it up against and say, this is how I know it's my subconscious. So I was like, what sounds like you? Me talking to my subconscious, right? Like I said, crazy town. So I heard this, like only that word, just that word alone. When I said, what do you sound like? I heard this was the response I heard. And when I heard it, you know how your ears like hear things spatially, and if you hear somebody talking to you behind to the left, it's different than hearing somebody behind to the right. So when I heard it say this, I started trying to map it immediately. And I was like, okay, what are the qualities of how that just came through? Because the way that it said this was not me. Like, it was me, but it wasn't me, right? I mean, I didn't force it. I wasn't making this happen. This just happened, and I could tell. So I was like, okay, why? What's the measure? What's the thing that I can always use as sort of like my litmus to say, okay, this is my subconscious using a word. So I noticed when it said this, that I could hear it in the back of my head, like back upper left. So I started thinking, okay, so maybe it's a regional thing. You know, maybe it's like related to like hemisphere in terms of how it manifests. Like maybe that's a way that I can know that it's doing that. And I thought to myself, and what was interesting about this was up until this point, I had been literally one-to-one trying to interact with my subconscious, like trying to directly ask it questions like it were a person in front of me. And when I noticed that back up into the left thing, I thought, okay, so when it talks, it's backing up to the left. If it's up there, that maybe is a marker that's my subconscious talking. And this was the first time that I didn't try to ask it a question. I wasn't trying to talk directly to it. And when I thought that, I heard no. And I heard it up in the, like, closer to the right, to the side. And it was super fascinating. Obviously, this could all be like, self-delusion or, me going insane or whatever, but if that is a thing that's possible, and if it is a thing people can do, it was really striking to me. Like when it said this, and I was like, oh, that's it. I can hear it. Like I can hear it talking. And then when it said no, I was like, oh shit, I didn't actually ask it that question. But like it's talking to me without me trying to ask it something now, because it's like I gave it this tool now, or I opened this line of dialogue, right? So it was like it started using it voluntarily a little bit. Or rather, it used it involuntarily of me trying to make it manifest it, which, if you look at it on its face, sounds like how people go insane, right? Ergo, fighting with dragons. That's why this came up. Because thinking about that exercise, I was like, part of why I was trying to figure out the language with it. Actually, I guess let me backtrack a little bit, because something else really fascinating happened when I was doing this. One of the things that I always noticed was a problem of language, and why I made that whole correlation between language and government. It's like, is government corrupt? Yeah, but it's better than no government, because it is, right? Is language crap? Yeah, but it's better than no language. The reason I had that observation is because people would communicate using the same words, but meaning completely different things. And I've been able to notice that forever, like as long as I can remember. So another thing that was really fascinating and interesting about this, it's it's hard to explain. It's like it was converting pictures into words. So what I mean by that, if somebody says I like cheese, right? You're like, what cheese? All cheese? Do you like some cheeses? Right? You need to drill in a little bit to see what they mean by cheese, because they might be saying I like cheese, and what they explicitly mean is I like cheddar. But they didn't say that. They said I like cheese. So you have to do some like probing there to figure out, which ultimately means really they're not using the right word. What they should have said is I like cheddar, or I like sharp cheddar. That would have told you what they meant. But what they said is I like cheese, so it was an incomplete, imperfect meaning. So you have to do this probing to figure out what they're actually saying. And if you don't do that probing simultaneously, you could be thinking, oh, I like cheese too, and you're thinking provolone. And what ends up happening is you're both saying, one person's saying I like cheddar, and you're saying, yeah, I like provolone too, which makes no fucking sense, right? Like that's not proper communication. That's the problem with language, right? So another thing that was really fascinating about sort of trying to give my subconscious word as a tool was it was redefining words on the fly. So what I mean by that is, because I'm a human being, I do it too. I use words imperfectly because the vehicle has its flaws, because words are to try to relay a concept, and sometimes when you're thinking of a concept, you don't necessarily have absolute and utter mastery of the language, or aren't thinking of mastery of the language as the primary thing you're trying or attempting to do. So you end up saying something that's not precisely what you mean, but it's an approximation of what you mean, right? So I might be asking you might ask a person, do you like cheese? And you're saying, do you like cheddar, right? So one thing that happened when I was doing this exercise with my subconscious was it was very much like, it wasn't this question precisely. This is just trying to explain it to stay with the analogy to maintain simplicity and explainability. At one point, it was like I asked it, do you like cheese? And was thinking cheddar. And when it responded, it was something akin to, yes, I like cheese. And it made me think of cheese as provolone instead of cheddar, which sounds ridiculous, but I hope that makes sense. Like it was redefining incomplete or missing context of words and actually redefining words for me on the fly. So when I said I like cheese, it knew what I meant and said I like cheese using the same words back to me, but now I had a different definition of the word because I could hear provolone and not cheese, even though it said cheese. Right, again, not that exact set of words, right? I wasn't talking about cheese, but it was redefining words on the fly, and it was doing it in a way that when it used a word, half a second before it said the word, I had a different understanding of what that word would have meant. And the second it said the word, I had a new, updated meaning of what that word meant, because, like, it talked to me using words, but, like, in a way that gave the same function as speaking in an image. So that was the other thing that was really fascinating about it. So, fighting a dragon. Why this is all relevant was because when I first started thinking about I was going to try doing this, right, I thought about the thing on its face, just straight up on its face. I was like, okay, so what you're going to try to do, Robert, is you're going to try to talk to your subconscious and have a conversation with yourself that's not yourself, and you're going to do that explicitly speaking and using words out loud on purpose. That sounds fucking crazy, bro. That's what I thought, right? And I sat there and thought about it for a little while before I actually did it, because it's not like funny haha, it sounds crazy. Like, no, that actually sounds like a way you can go crazy. Like, actually. Like, not funny haha. Like, a way that you can end up being a person on a corner rambling to yourself about a piece of cardboard and a lovely tea party you had. Like, I saw legitimately the risk of what I was trying to do in terms of what it could do to my sanity. So I really seriously considered that. Probably not enough, because how do you seriously consider potentially making yourself go insane enough? But anyway, the risk of it wasn't lost on me. Because what if I start talking to my subconscious all the time, and I'm doing it in front of people, and now it gets to the point where I'm convinced I'm talking to this part of me that's not me, and I'm having a real conversation with it that's not a real conversation anybody else can hear. And what happens if I start valuing that conversation as more meaningful and more relevant than any other conversation I'm having with a living human being. And all you ever see me doing ever when I'm talking is talking to this imaginary person that you can't see. And whenever you try to use words to communicate with me, I'm now getting lost because the way you're using words is not the way I'm using words. You're using cheese to mean cheddar. And I hear that and I'm like, huh? Right? Like I was very seriously aware of, to some degree, what sort of shit I was playing with by doing that. So I was maybe not appropriately trepidatious, but I was trepidatious about doing it for sure. So anyway, after that happened, I was like, oh, this is cool. A couple different things happened. So one, I was having to make it shut up sometimes. Like it was showing up when I wasn't asking it to, and saying things to me that I could hear, but saying things to me actually using words and sentences, like complete sentences, complete thoughts that I wasn't making happen at all. And that was disconcerting, for one. Because I mean, I've had thoughts about a thing where I'm like, oh, maybe I should do this, and then I think about it for a little bit, and I'm like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this because X, Y, and Z. And it's hard to explain how this is fundamentally different, but it's fundamentally different. It's not the same thing. It's not I have a thought. It's literally something other than me had a thought and sent it to me and told it to me. Like it feels that fundamentally different. I've had plenty of thoughts growing up in my lifetime, and this was not that. Like, maybe it was functionally, but, like, the way it sounded, the way it felt was fundamentally different. So that happened a couple times where I had to, like, I was just sort of like, yeah, okay, well, we're not talking right now. And, like, I didn't say that. It was more just like I sort of was like, shut off, shut off, shut off. Also, I noticed when I was working, and I was having to focus on hopping so many things at once, like, I couldn't make it talk even if I wanted to. So if I was having to focus on work, which is difficult for me for a lot of reasons, specifically, I think, because of some degree of how I'm having to turn off my more creative elements so I can maintain the discipline to do all the other things that I have to do at work. Because on a very intrinsic level, like, I don't want to do a lot of the things I have to do. So I have to work very hard to make myself capable of doing them. So when I was in the middle of doing work, I couldn't activate that thing again. I could activate it before and I could activate it after. And sometimes if I was in the middle of, like, I'd hear a peep, like, out of a lockbox, right? But trying to actually go back and interact with it, like, I couldn't make it happen anymore. Once I wasn't working, I could totally do it again, right? So that was interesting too. And the reason why I went to fighting a dragon part, because this is where I get into the part where, like, I got some sort of, the stuff I talked to about up until now, it's like, I was like, oh, okay, I see how you can go a little bit crazy. But then something happened where I was like, oh, I really see now what crazy might look like doing this. I was playing RimWorld, and, like, I had been listening to some random interview with Peterson, and I looked over at my game in RimWorld, and I heard all the noises of what was going on inside the game because of the sound effects, because I have all the music turned off, so I can just hear the sound effects. I got, like, some research computers. I can hear them beeping. I can hear, like, the ambient air noises that the game has. I can hear, like, animals moving around, doors closing, and I can see one of the characters I have doing an activity that I had them doing. Sorry, Jesus. So in RimWorld, one of the ways that the characters can manifest is sort of like this looking right at you way, right? And when I was hearing all these sounds and I saw this character, like, I actually saw Jordan Peterson. Not like hallucinogenic. It wasn't like I saw his face, but, like, it was like in a very real way I saw what I had conceived as a different entity to be his essence as far as I interpreted it. So when I saw this character in RimWorld looking at me, it's like I was transported to this place where that thing in my game was Jordan Peterson, and, like, as real as I can mean that. It's like what I imagine is a proximate explanation or experience similar to that is the way I've heard people talk about DMT, because I've never done DMT, but the way I've heard it be described, like it was like that, man. Like that was him as far as my brain was concerned for like a good 3 or 4 seconds. And that's when I was like, oh, that's what going crazy looks like. And it's like I felt like I got a really good glimpse into what sort of going insane looked like. And also a question of like, and I foolishly asked the question afterward, is that crazy? Which is even more crazy, right? So part of what I mean by fighting the dragon there is like, one of the things I've been trying to figure out is how to reconcile sort of like my work brain with my other brain, because, or more like my engineer brain with my creative brain is sort of how I've explained it. It's very hard for me to activate my creative brain when I'm having to do this more sort of engineering brain when I'm at work, but it's also not using my creative brain is like a recurring death for me daily. So I've been trying to figure out, okay, how do I do this to where I can use both of them? And the problem I sort of run into and have with this is when I have that part of me activated that's creative and super complicated problem solving and high levels of engagement, like I remember everything. I don't need to write a list for anything ever. Like I remember everything that happens, like almost to the point that it's photographic. It's not quite photographic because I know I have enough understanding of what that phenomenon is. It's not the same thing, but it's like you don't need to remind me of any detail. I know everything that's happening all at once, all at the same time, wherever I'm at. And I'm talking about this has happened when I'm working. First job in video games was just like that when I was running QA at Edge Reality, this company, when I was working on The Sims 3 for the console ports. Whenever I was working on it, I knew everything that was going on at all times, took no notes. I was hyper engaged, like everything, like both of my brains were working at the same time and like I could feel it. So, problem I've been dealing with and why I started getting into this whole thing of like dealing with, let's try talking to your subconscious, dummy, because that's a great idea. Part of why I did that was because I'm trying to figure out how to reconcile that, because there's some level of degree to which I can feel my creative brain like revolting. It's always been revolting. Now it's rebelling. No, I can feel it like it's like it's dead or it's beaten or it's like it's locked up in a box, right? And I'm trying to figure out how to release it, because part of the consequence of that is I'm not able to do what I'm doing at work as effectively because I can't tap into that aspect of myself too. So I've been trying to figure out if I have to separate them. Maybe I don't, but let's say for sake of argument, I have to start with them being separated at minimum. So how do I use this one for work, and how do I unplug that from work, and then how do I activate the other one and use that, and then maybe if I'm lucky, how do I figure out how to merge those two together again? So that's sort of what I've been trying to figure out. So I thought, hey, let's talk to our subconscious. So when I talk about, fighting a dragon, lots of the dragon symbolism is about something that's terrifying but you have to confront. And it's when I saw what I was seeing in that video game, I was like, that's a fucking dragon right there. That was like, St. George, you need to turn your fucking horse around. You need to gallop your ass away because that motherfucker's going to eat you. Like, I could feel the severity of how I could have gone insane if I sat there and just kept looking at it like that. Like, I could see it clear as day. All that said, I don't think I'm going to stop doing what I'm doing. But, because I don't think I can. I don't think I have a choice. I think I have to keep doing it. But I might go crazy. If so, it was nice knowing everybody. So that was one thing I wanted to talk about. Geez, I've already been talking forever. Christ. I guess I'll keep going. I got a couple more notes things. Part of what I'm also doing is trying to do this more regularly, even if I'm just talking about what I'm thinking, just so I can... The next note, language, words, and art. Right? So part of what I'm trying to do, it's interesting using your creative brain. And one of the phenomena I've noticed that's occurred and happened to me, and I've heard lots of artists talk about this specifically, especially if they're more visual or musical artists, not necessarily like, wordsmith type artists like writers or poets. When I'm being hyper creative, it becomes very difficult for me to speak. Which is funny, given how fast I talk and how quickly I hop between, like $5 SAT words. But when I'm being creative, it's very difficult for me to speak or process language. Like, I start missing things that I would catch normally, like half awake. That, like, I don't even have to pay attention to catch verbally, typically. But when my creative brain starts activating, like, I start missing all sorts of things about language, and to try to communicate using words becomes clumsy, and like I can't do it right. I can't even conceptualize in words or language anymore. Like I'm not in that space anymore. So one of the things I was thinking about that is I'm trying to figure out if there's a way for me in particular, at least, to bridge the gap between those things, which I'm not sure there is, but there might be a way for me to rapid context switch between them, which is sort of like a quick fire think, activate creative brain. I can't speak or I can't think in words, but I can process this image and this picture and this tapestry, and then I can take enough of that, put it through enough of a filter that I can get my brain to hop back to the other place, and then I can start converting it into words. But it's almost like it has to be this two-step process. So anyway, I was just thinking about that. I thought that was it's interesting to me hearing artists talk about or seeing them struggle with trying to convert things into words, and they're like, I don't know how to say what I did, or I don't know the words for what's going on. And I'm assuming there's some correlation that somebody that's in the field is probably like, yeah, dummy, we've known that since 1976. But for me, it's a new revelation, or at least that I'm confident that there's potentially a hard link there. And the further you get towards an artistic inclination, if it's like music or painting or drawing or visual art in particular, it seems likely to me the further and further you get away from a mastery of language, which I find interesting. Again, probably something they've known since like 1825 or fucking whatever, but it's interesting to me. Communicate, selling self. Oh yeah, this was, and this is related to this words and art thing. Because if you're going to be a high functioning artist that makes a living off of your art, one of the things you have to do is be able to sell yourself, communicate, network, know a lot of people. And I think that's an interesting dichotomy because how do I explain this? I think potentially, and this is just a super rough, this isn't even necessarily a hypothesis, this is more of me trying to understand a way to say the problem I'm thinking about. I think potentially artists who are hyper excellent at being artists and can communicate and sell themselves and can network and they have the impetus and desire to do that. I think maybe that they're capable of doing that means that in a very real sense, they are not the best artists, because I think the best artists probably can't communicate and sell themselves at all. I think there's probably sort of like a mutual exclusion past the 0.01% of excellence in the field. Yeah, I mean, that's a good way to say it. I don't know that for sure, but I think that might be the case. That the better someone is able to communicate and network and sell themselves to other people, potentially the worse they are as an artist, which is interesting because some of the people that can sell themselves and sell art, they can make fantastic, phenomenal art. But that really got me thinking, wait a minute, what's the actual best art that's out there? Because maybe it's not the people that can talk. Because, the more points you put in one thing, it's like a D&D character sheet, right? The more points you put in one thing are points you're not putting in something else. So maybe to some degree, and also thinking about my issue with being creative in language and words, right? When I put those two things together, I think maybe the people that can actually make really, really good art and sell themselves aren't the people that can make really, 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 really good art. I bet those are different categories. I'm willing to bet. Just a guess. I already talked about that. Beauty. What the fuck was I talking about with that? Oh, that was something about Peterson talking about beauty being sustaining as bread, or even more so in some cases. I mean, I don't know why I wrote a note there, because my response is yes and no. Right? But in yes and no, I'm probably the way that he's meant, so I don't know why I made a note about that. Too high fidelity for vision. What the hell was I talking about there? I mean, sort of what I'm talking about with talking to my subconscious, right? They were having a conversation. This is Peterson, whoever did the illustrations for his book. I can't remember her name. I'm not going to look. You can go find the video. they were talking. She was talking about explicitly some of the choices that she made with her art and her drawing was she was trying to bring things to the forefront, because the way people see, and of course Peterson was echoing this, was when they focus on a thing, they see the thing that they're looking at in super high fidelity, but other things that are around it, like over here, this monitor, and like my ceiling, those start to like fade out in fidelity, so I can't see them to the level that I can see this right in front of me. So why I think I wrote this down, if I'm remembering properly, is I was trying to figure out. I thought it was interesting and really that's my subconscious, because really what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to figure out how to increase my fidelity while not dulling my vision, which is, I don't know how possible it is, but that's kind of what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to make it so I can see more things at once, and I think maybe there's a after a fashion brain hack where you can do something like this, but I don't know how effective it is or if it's effective and is placebo. Like, I don't know for sure, but that's sort of what I'm experimenting with, is trying to figure that out. How much I can see things to a greater fidelity without it blurring vision. Being able to see, like if you imagine looking at something and you see this much of it in super high focus, kind of what I'm doing with my experiments with my subconscious is I'm trying to take this focus and make it this focus that I can see the same level of fidelity. That's kind of what I'm trying to do. So I think that's why I made a note on that. Anyway, I think I'm going to keep trying to do these, because that this no thing was striking. It was really striking as an experience. Yeah, like it's hard to explain how impactful that was. So and now it's sort of like it. I'm talking about it like it's a different entity. See, I'm fighting a dragon right there. Maybe you should turn and run away from it. But to some degree, it has some amount of the gift of language now, and it's it's using it when I'm not asking it to, which maybe isn't functionally different from a thought just popping into your head, but like it feels different. It feels different for sure. Like I'll tell you that for damn sure. There's no translation layer. Like it's told me in words and provides me translation at the same time. Like it's really fucking odd. I don't know. So that's what I'm thinking about right now. Not too much into this whole psychological polymorphism thing, which I still think is a thing, and I don't have any idea how I could possibly prove that ever, or aggregate that into a collection of thoughts that somebody would look at that and say, ooh, I think this guy might be onto something. Like, I still don't know what to do about that, but I still think that's accurate. Still plan on talking about that. But I think doing stuff like this, where I'm sort of talking through how my brain's working through stuff and what sort of stuff I'm experimenting with, just like document it. I think it's a little useful, because I end up watching these 2 or 3 times myself to hear myself talk, actually, not like in my brain, which is also actually, God, that's complicated. Yeah, so I'll probably keep doing these. I'll probably actually start doing more of these where I'm just talking about how I'm thinking what I'm thinking about. Oh, unrelated to all this stuff. Maynard Keenan. I ordered some of his wine from his place because I understand wine, and if you give it to me, I'll be able to like tell you like what sort of wood hints are in the soil or whatever, right? So like I get wine. I assumed Maynard's wine from Caduceus was probably going to be good, just because. I mean, not to be like fanboy about it, but the guy that writes 46 and 2, like he probably goes after everything like a bat out of hell, right? So I assumed it would probably be to a decent level of quality, and it would probably be good, which is saying something for wines out of Arizona. No disrespect. I don't mean to disrespect by that, I promise. But, you know, comparatively, like come on. I mean, maybe somebody think that's me being snobby, but dude, I've drinking a lot of wine. I haven't drinking a lot of wine out of Arizona that's as good as wine out of Italy or France. Sorry, that's not for lack of trying. Somebody might think it is, but it's not. Anyway, point of that, I actually tried one of his. I got like a smattering of his wines, 5, because I always want to try them. And one of them, Nubis, was one that he made explicitly for red meat. And I can say, after having it with a perfectly cooked steak out of a Traeger and drinking that wine, it was fucking phenomenal wine. Like, it was way better than I thought it was going to be. And I already thought it was going to be good. That's not that's not a Tool fan saying that about Maynard's wine. That's like a wine snob saying that about wine. Like that, it was really fucking good. Way better than I thought it would be. Aside, nobody cares about that, but I wanted to mention that somehow. So there you go.